Some people knock before entering your life. Others walk in like they've always had the key. The rain was coming down hard that Thursday evening, making tiny rivers on the old windows of the small apartment. David sat on the floor surrounded by cardboard boxes, wondering how his life had gotten so messy. Just 3 months ago, he had his own place, a steady job, and what he thought was a solid relationship. Now here he was, 28 years old, living in the tiny apartment above his grandmother's garage like he was 18 again. The space wasn't much to look at. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once. A small bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, but it smelled like home, like his grandmother's cooking and the lavender soap she always used. The wooden floors creaked with every step, the same sounds he remembered from visiting as a kid during summer breaks. David pulled another book from a box and added it to the growing pile next to him. He was trying to organize his things, but every item seemed to remind him of something he'd lost. The coffee mug his ex-girlfriend had bought him. The business cards from the job he'd been laid off from. The framed photo of friends who barely called anymore. His phone buzzed on the small table. Another rejection email from a job interview. He set it aside without reading the whole thing. He knew what it said anyway. Thanks for your interest, but we've decided to go with someone else. Story of his life lately. The sound of footsteps on the wooden stairs outside caught his attention. Heavy, confident steps. Not the careful shuffle his grandmother usually made. David frowned and looked toward the door. Nobody ever came up here except him. His grandmother always called first, and she certainly wouldn't be climbing stairs in weather like this. The footsteps stopped right outside his door. David waited, listening. Maybe someone had taken shelter under the small overhang. But then he heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. His heart started beating faster. Had someone broken in downstairs and gotten his grandmother's keys? Was this some kind of robbery? David looked around for something to defend himself with, but the closest thing was a hardcover book about photography. The door opened slowly, and David held his breath. But instead of a burglar, a young woman stepped inside, shaking raindrops from her long, dark hair. She was probably around his age, wearing scrubs under a thick winter coat. She moved like she belonged there, closing the door behind her and wiping her feet on the small mat. David stared at her, book still raised in his hand like the world's least threatening weapon. The woman looked up and saw him sitting there among the boxes, and instead of screaming or running away, she smiled. "You must be David," she said, as if they'd planned to meet. "Your grandmother talks about you all the time." "I'm Lisa." David slowly lowered the book. "Lisa? I take care of your grandmother during the day," she explained, unwinding a scarf from around her neck. "She asked me to check on the heating up here. Said it's been acting up lately." That sounded like something his grandmother would say, even though the heating worked just fine. David realized he was still staring and quickly got to his feet, brushing dust off his jeans. "Oh, right. The heating? Yeah, it's been fine, actually." Lisa hung her coat on the hook behind the door, another action that seemed completely natural, like she'd done it 100 times before. "Mind if I take a look anyway? She'll ask me about it tomorrow, and you know how grandmothers worry." David found himself nodding, even though something felt strange about the whole situation. Not bad strange, just different. Like pieces of a puzzle he didn't know he was solving. Lisa walked past him toward the small radiator under the window, and David caught a whiff of something pleasant, maybe vanilla or honey. She knelt down and pretended to examine the heating unit, running her hands along the pipes. "Seems to be working fine," she said after a minute. Then she stood up and really looked around the apartment for the first time. Her eyes took in the boxes, the scattered belongings, the general chaos of a life being put back together. "Moving in?" she asked, but not in a nosy way. More like she genuinely cared about the answer. "Something like that," David said. He felt embarrassed about the mess, about living above his grandmother's garage, about the whole situation. But Lisa didn't seem to judge him at all. "Need help?" she asked simply. Before David could answer, she was already kneeling beside one of the boxes, pulling out books and looking at the titles with interest. She held up a cookbook and smiled. "My mom has the same one, makes the best chicken soup recipe." Something about the way she said it, casual and warm, made David relax a little. He sat back down on the floor across from her. "I don't cook much," he admitted. "Neither did I until I started working with older folks. They love to teach you their recipes." Lisa continued organizing the books, creating neat stacks without being asked. Your grandmother makes incredible apple pie. Has she made one for you yet? Not yet. I've only been here a few weeks. Lisa nodded like she understood. Big changes take time to settle into. There was something about the way she said it that made David think she knew about big changes herself. She wasn't just making small talk. She actually got it. For the next hour, they worked together in comfortable quiet. Lisa folded his clothes with care, organizing them by type and color. She arranged his books on the small shelf by author's last name. She even found a better spot for his desk lamp that gave more light to the whole room. David found himself telling her things he hadn't planned to share, about losing his job, about his relationship ending, about feeling like he was starting over from zero at almost 30. Lisa listened without trying to fix anything or offer advice he didn't ask for. She just listened. Sometimes life forces us to slow down and figure out what we really want, she said at one point, carefully placing his framed photos on the windowsill. Doesn't feel good when it's happening, but looking back it usually makes sense. When they finished, the apartment looked completely different. Not just organized, but somehow more like home. Lisa had a way of knowing exactly where things should go, like she understood how David lived even though they'd just met. I should get going, Lisa said eventually, checking the time on her phone. Your grandmother will be wondering where I am. She put her coat back on and wrapped the scarf around her neck. At the door, she turned back. I check on her most weekdays around this time. Sometimes the heating might need another look. David smiled, finally understanding. Yeah, old heating systems can be unpredictable. Exactly. Lisa grinned back at him. See you tomorrow, David. After she left, David sat in his newly organized apartment and realized something had shifted. Not just in the space, but in him. For the first time in months, he felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. He looked around at his belongings, now arranged with care in their proper places, and thought about how naturally Lisa had moved through his space. Like she'd been there before, like she belonged there. Outside, the rain had stopped and evening light was filtering through the clean windows. David made himself a cup of tea and sat in his chair, the one Lisa had positioned perfectly near the window for reading. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd ask his grandmother more about this Lisa who walked into rooms like she'd always belonged there. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in early December. David was upstairs working on job applications when he heard Lisa's voice downstairs, but something was wrong. Her usual cheerful greeting to his grandmother was replaced by urgent, worried tones. He rushed down to find his grandmother sitting on the kitchen floor, looking pale and confused. Lisa was kneeling beside her, checking her pulse with professional calm despite the worry clearly written on her face. I'm okay. I'm okay, his grandmother kept saying, but her voice was shaky. Just lost my balance for a moment. Grandma, you're sitting on the floor, David said gently, his heart racing. That's not okay. Lisa looked up at him with serious eyes. We need to take her to the hospital. She might have hit her head when she fell, and at her age we can't take chances. The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency rooms, doctors, and medical tests. David felt helpless watching the nurses wheel his grandmother away for x-rays and scans. He'd never seen her look so small and fragile before. She'd always been the strongest person he knew, the one who held the family together when his parents divorced, who helped him through every difficult phase of his life. Lisa never left their side. Even though her shift with his grandmother had officially ended hours ago, she stayed, translating medical terms David didn't understand, asking the right questions when his mind went blank, and somehow knowing exactly what his grandmother needed before she even asked. The good news is no broken bones, the doctor finally told them, but she has a mild concussion, and we want to keep her for observation for a few days. At her age, these things can be unpredictable. David felt his knees go weak with relief, but also with a new kind of fear. His grandmother had always seemed invincible to him. This was his first real glimpse of the fact that she wouldn't be around forever. That evening, while his grandmother slept in her hospital bed, David and Lisa sat in the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, sharing terrible coffee from the vending machine. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there, David said quietly. Lisa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. You would have handled it just fine. You're stronger than you think. I didn't feel strong. I felt like a scared little kid. That's normal. She's the most important person in your life. David looked at Lisa's tired face in the harsh hospital lighting. She'd been taking care of his grandmother and him all day without a single complaint, even though none of this was her responsibility anymore once the ambulance arrived. "Why did you stay?" he asked. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "Because I care about her, and because—" She paused, looking down at her hands. "Because I care about you too." Something in the way she said it made David's chest tight. Not just friendly caring, but something deeper. "Lisa, I know this probably isn't the right time to talk about this," she continued, still not looking at him. "But sitting here today watching you with her, I realize something. I've been making excuses to see you every day for weeks now. I look forward to those visits more than anything else in my day. And I hope, maybe you do too." David reached over and took her hand. "I do. I really do." They sat holding hands in that quiet hospital corridor, and David felt like despite everything scary and uncertain about the day, something important had just become clear. Over the next 3 days, while his grandmother recovered in the hospital, David learned even more about Lisa. He discovered that she'd been taking care of people since she was 12 years old, when her mother got sick and Lisa became responsible for her younger brothers. Taking care of others wasn't just her job. It was how she showed love, how she understood her place in the world. "Sometimes I worry that's all I know how to do," Lisa admitted one evening, as they walked down the hospital hallway to get some fresh air. "Take care of people. I'm not sure who I am when I'm not needed." "You're someone who chose to stay here with people you cared about when you didn't have to," David said. "You're someone who makes terrible hospital coffee taste better just by sharing it. You're someone who knows exactly what to say when I'm scared." Lisa smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. "Those are nice things to be." David stopped walking and turned to face her. "Lisa, I need to tell you something. My last relationship ended because she said I was too much work, too needy, too dependent on other people. I've been afraid to get close to anyone since then because I don't want to be a burden." "David, but with you, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like you actually want to take care of me and I want to take care of you too." "Is that crazy?" Lisa stepped closer to him. "If it's crazy, then I'm crazy too. Because, David, taking care of you doesn't feel like work. It feels like coming home." On Thursday morning, his grandmother was finally alert enough to have a real conversation. When David and Lisa walked into her room together, she looked back and forth between them with knowing eyes. "Well," she said in her familiar no-nonsense voice, "it's about time you two stopped dancing around each other." David felt his face turn red. "Grandma, don't grandma me. I've been watching you both for weeks. Lisa, honey, you've been finding more things wrong with that apartment than a building inspector. And David, you've been happier these past few weeks than you've been since you were 16. Lisa laughed, the sound bright and welcome in the sterile hospital room. "You've been matchmaking, haven't you?" "Guilty as charged," his grandmother said with satisfaction. "Though, to be fair, you two did most of the work yourselves. I just provided opportunities. The heating system never needed checking, did it?" David asked. "Works perfectly. Has for 20 years. The smoke detector? Tested it myself last month." David shook his head, but he was smiling. "You're sneaky, Grandma. I'm effective. There's a difference." She reached out and took both their hands. "Lisa, sweetie, you've been like family to me from the day I met you. David, you've needed someone who sees taking care of you as a joy, not a chore. Seemed like an obvious solution to me." That evening, instead of Lisa leaving after visiting hours, she came back upstairs to David's apartment with him. They didn't make any grand announcements or decisions. She just made tea for both of them and settled into the chair that had somehow become hers over the past few weeks. "So," David said, sitting across from her with his own cup. "What do we do now?" Lisa smiled at him over her tea. "I don't know, but I'd like to figure it out together if you want to." "I want to." Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, David looked around his small apartment, their space now, really, and felt something settle into place. For months, he'd been trying to rebuild his life alone, but maybe, he thought, watching Lisa curl up in her chair with a book, the best things were built with someone else. When his grandmother came home from the hospital a week later, everything had quietly shifted. Lisa's belongings had naturally found their way into David's apartment. Her nursing textbook stacked next to his job search guides, her coffee mug in the cabinet next to his, her extra sweater draped over the back of what had become her chair. Nobody made a big announcement about it. David didn't ask Lisa to move in, and she didn't ask if she could stay. It just happened, the way water finds the easiest path downhill. One evening, she was there for dinner. The next morning, she was making breakfast, and by the end of the week, David couldn't imagine the space without her in it. His grandmother watched this transformation with obvious delight, though she tried to hide her satisfaction behind practical concerns. "Lisa, dear, are you sure that apartment is big enough for 2 people?" she asked one morning while Lisa was helping her organize her medications. "It's cozy," Lisa replied diplomatically. "Besides, we're both pretty tidy people." "Cozy is one way to put it," David's grandmother said with a meaningful look. "Though I suppose young people don't need much space when they're getting along so well." The truth was, the apartment did feel small sometimes, especially when David was job hunting on his laptop, while Lisa studied for her nursing school entrance exams. But instead of feeling cramped, it felt intimate. They learned each other's rhythms quickly. Lisa studied best in the mornings with classical music playing softly, while David preferred the quiet of late evening for his applications. They developed a system of silent communication, a touch on the shoulder meaning need coffee, a gentle squeeze of the hand meaning rough day, talk later. 1 month after his grandmother's accident, David finally got a call he'd been waiting for. A local rehabilitation center wanted to interview him for a position as a therapy aide while he went back to school for his physical therapy degree. "They called back?" Lisa asked, looking up from her anatomy textbook as David hung up the phone. "Second interview. Next Friday." Lisa jumped up and hugged him so enthusiastically they both nearly fell over. "David, this is perfect. It's exactly what you wanted." "It's just an interview," he said, but he was grinning. "It's the right interview. I can feel it." That evening, Lisa helped him prepare by pretending to be the interviewer. She asked him serious questions about his goals and experience, then silly ones that made him laugh until his nerves settled. "Why do you want to work in rehabilitation?" she asked in an exaggerated professional voice. "Because I want to help people rebuild their lives after everything falls apart," David answered honestly. "I know what it feels like to start over, and I know how much it helps to have someone believe you can do it." Lisa dropped her fake interviewer voice. "That's perfect. That's exactly what they need to hear." The job interview went better than David had dared hope. The director of the rehabilitation center was impressed with his genuine passion for helping others and his willingness to start school part-time while working. They offered him the position that same afternoon. "I got it," he told Lisa when she came upstairs after finishing her shift with his grandmother. "I knew it," she said, spinning around his small kitchen. "When do you start?" 2 weeks. And Lisa, they have a program where they help pay for employees to get their degrees. I could actually afford to go back to school. That night, they celebrated with takeout from the Chinese restaurant downtown and cheap wine from the corner store. His grandmother joined them, bringing homemade cookies and stories about David's childhood dreams of becoming a doctor. He used to bandage all his stuffed animals, she told Lisa. Made little crutches out of popsicle sticks for his teddy bear. "Grandma," David protested, but he was laughing. "It's sweet," Lisa said. "You've always wanted to help people heal." As winter turned to spring, their life together found a comfortable rhythm. David started his new job and loved it immediately. He worked with patients recovering from strokes, accidents, and surgeries, helping them regain strength and independence. Every day confirmed that this was exactly what he was meant to do. Lisa passed her nursing school entrance exams with flying colors and was accepted into the program starting in the fall. She continued caring for David's grandmother during the day, but now it felt less like a job and more like taking care of family. "I have a confession," his grandmother said one afternoon while Lisa was helping her plant flowers in her garden. David was supposed to be studying but was instead watching them from his window above. "What's that?" Lisa asked, carefully placing a tulip bulb in the ground. "I never really needed as much help as I claimed when I hired you. I was lonely, yes, and I did need some assistance. But mostly..." She paused, patting soil around the bulb. "Mostly I wanted someone around who might be good for David when he came home." Lisa sat back on her heels, looking surprised. "You planned this from the beginning?" "Not planned exactly. Hoped, maybe. You were so kind during the interview, so genuine. And when you mentioned you were single and new to town, well, an old woman can dream, can't she?" "You're terrible," Lisa said, but she was smiling. "I'm effective. There's a difference. And look how well it worked out." That evening, Lisa told David about the conversation while they cooked dinner together in their tiny kitchen. "She's been scheming this whole time," Lisa said, stirring sauce while David chopped vegetables. "Are you upset about it?" Lisa considered this seriously. "No, I don't think so. I mean, we still chose each other, right? She just provided the opportunity. Like a very subtle dating service, exactly. A very subtle, very effective dating service." David set down his knife and turned to face her. "Lisa, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about the future? Like our future?" Lisa turned off the burner and gave him her full attention. "All the time, do you?" "Yeah. I think about us both finishing school, maybe getting our own place someday. Something with a real kitchen and space for a proper dining table." He paused, suddenly feeling nervous. "I think about more permanent things." "What kind of permanent things?" David took her hands, noting how perfectly they fit in his. "The kind where we stop calling this temporary. Where we make official what everyone already knows." Lisa's eyes went bright. "David, are you—" "Not yet," he said quickly. "I mean, not today. But someday soon, when I have a real job and we're both in school and everything is more settled. Would you maybe want to?" Lisa stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, soft and sure. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Someday soon, yes." From downstairs came the sound of his grandmother's television and the familiar evening routine they'd all fallen into together. Outside, spring was arriving with new flowers and longer days. And in their small apartment above the garage, David and Lisa held each other and planned a future that had started with a rainy evening, and a woman who walked into his room like she'd always belonged there. Because now, David realized, she always had. 2 years later, on a rainy Thursday evening that reminded David of the night they first met, he found himself standing in their small apartment surrounded by boxes again. But this time, everything was different. These weren't the scattered remains of a broken life. They were the carefully packed belongings of two people building something beautiful together. Lisa was at nursing school, finishing her final semester, and David had just completed his first year of physical therapy school while working at the rehabilitation center. They were moving to a larger apartment across town, one with a real kitchen and enough space for both of them to study without sitting on top of each other. But before they left this place that had become so special to them, David had something important to do. He'd been planning this moment for months, ever since Lisa had graduated nursing school with honors and got her first job at the same hospital where he hoped to work after graduation. Everything was falling into place for them, their separate dreams weaving together into something even better than either had imagined alone. David looked around the small space one more time. The apartment looked almost exactly like it had that first night Lisa walked in, complete with boxes scattered across the floor. He'd spent the afternoon arranging everything perfectly, even finding the same book he'd been holding like a weapon when she'd surprised him. His grandmother was in on the plan, of course. She'd been dropping hints for months about how nice it would be to have a wedding to plan, how she wasn't getting any younger, and how Lisa was already like a granddaughter to her anyway. Today she'd managed to delay Lisa at nursing school with a fake emergency about her medication schedule. Giving David time to set up, at exactly 6 o'clock, David heard Lisa's familiar footsteps on the wooden stairs. His heart started beating fast, just like it had 2 years ago, but for completely different reasons now. The door opened and Lisa walked in, shaking raindrops from her hair just like she had the first time. She looked around at the boxes and laughed. "Are you feeling nostalgic about moving day?" she asked, hanging her coat on the hook behind the door with the same natural ease she'd shown from the very beginning. "Something like that," David said, and his voice only shook a little bit. Lisa walked toward him, and David dropped to one knee right there in the middle of their small living room, pulling out the ring he'd been carrying in his pocket for weeks. "Lisa," he started, then stopped because she'd put both hands over her mouth and her eyes were already filling with tears. "Lisa, that first night when you walked into this room, it was like you'd always belonged here. Not just in this apartment, but in my life. You turned everything around for me without even trying." "David," she whispered through her fingers, "I know this place is tiny, and we're about to move somewhere better, but this is where our story started. This is where I learned what it meant to have someone choose to stay, choose to build something with me, choose to make a home out of whatever space we had." Lisa was crying now, happy tears that made David's heart feel too big for his chest. I love how you take care of everyone around you. But mostly I love how you let me take care of you too. I love how you make everything better just by being there. I love how you turn any place into home. David took a shaky breath. Lisa, will you marry me? Will you keep walking into my life like you belong there forever? Yes, Lisa said, dropping to her knees in front of him. Yes, of course, yes. David slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, and then they were both crying and laughing and holding each other in the middle of their almost empty apartment, while rain pattered against the windows. I can't believe you recreated our first night, Lisa said, looking around at the boxes through her tears. I wanted to propose in the place where everything began. Your grandmother knew about this, didn't she? David grinned. She's been asking me when I was going to make an honest woman of you for 6 months. I think she's more excited about this than we are. As if summoned by the mention of her name, they heard his grandmother's voice calling from downstairs. Did she say yes? I have champagne ready. Lisa and David looked at each other and burst out laughing. She's been waiting down there this whole time, hasn't she? Lisa asked. Probably had her ear pressed to the ceiling. They spent the evening celebrating with his grandmother, who produced not only champagne, but also a photo album she'd been secretly putting together documenting their entire relationship. Pictures of them painting Lisa's old apartment, David helping his grandmother in her garden while Lisa watched from the window above, the three of them at David's graduation from the therapy aid program. I knew from the first week, his grandmother said, turning pages slowly, the way you two looked at each other, the way you just fit together. Some things are meant to be and you can't fight destiny. You mean you can't fight your matchmaking, David said fondly. Same thing. 6 months later, they were married in his grandmother's backyard on a perfect spring morning. Lisa wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly. David wore his grandfather's watch and a smile that hadn't left his face in weeks. His grandmother officiated through her friend who was a minister, and the ceremony was small but perfect. Lisa's family had driven in from 3 states away, and David's cousins came from across the country. Everyone agreed they'd never seen a more natural couple. 2 people who so obviously belonged together that it was hard to imagine they'd ever been apart. After the wedding, they moved into the house his grandmother decided to give them as a wedding present. I'm getting too old to manage this big place, she said, though everyone knew she could have managed it for another 20 years easily. Besides, I like the idea of having you close by. They converted the apartment above the garage into David's physical therapy office, where he eventually started his own practice after finishing school. Lisa worked as a pediatric nurse at the children's hospital, specializing in helping kids recover from serious injuries and illnesses. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lisa gave David the best present of all, the news that they were going to have a baby. Their daughter was born the following spring, a little girl with David's eyes and Lisa's smile who seemed to belong in their family from the very first moment. His grandmother lived to see her first great-grandchild take her first steps, and she spent her final months teaching Lisa all the family recipes and sharing stories about David's childhood that made Lisa laugh until her sides hurt. When his grandmother passed peacefully, in her sleep at 88, she left behind a letter explaining that she'd known from the first day of hiring Lisa that she was meant to be part of their family. Some people spend their whole lives looking for where they belong, she wrote. But occasionally, if you're very lucky, belonging finds you instead. Now 10 years after that rainy Thursday evening, David often stands at the window of what used to be a small apartment and watches Lisa in the garden below, usually with their 2 children helping her plant flowers or chase butterflies. Sometimes he thinks about that scared, lost young man who used to live in that tiny space above the garage, and he can barely remember what it felt like to be so alone. Lisa still has a key to every room in their house, but more than that, she has the key to every part of David's life. She still walks into every space like she belongs there, because now she does, not just in their home, but in their family, their community, their shared dreams and daily routines. Every evening when Lisa comes home from work and walks through their front door, David feels the same little jump in his heart that he felt that first night. Some things never change, even when everything else does. Love that's meant to be has a way of feeling both brand new and ancient at the same time, like coming home to a place you never knew you were looking for.